Kiss of Death by Neon Sangetsu, Chapter 2, Kiss of Hope. You cannot pass, and who are you to claim such a thing, mortal? My name is Uzumaki Naruto. I am a shinobi from the Hidden Leaf Village, host of the Nine-Tailed Fox, protector of the innocent, devourer of gods. I say again, you shall not pass. Cross that line in the sand at your own peril, but know that if you do, if you take that fateful step forward into my domain, if you even think of hurting Salem, a standoff, kiss of death. A man and a woman together at the end of the world. Really, it sounded like the beginning of a lost fable, some silly story told around campfires to the light children, or serve as cautionary tale to those who wouldn't listen. Salem had never been much for fairy tales, even as a child. She knew her story was unlikely to have a happy ending. She had learned to stomach that terrible truth long ago, albeit begrudgingly. The best she could hope for was the occasional pleasant dream amidst the sea of never-ending nightmares that was her life. And yet this was real. Salem knew it to be so when she woke from fevered dreams and found Naruto tending the dying embers of last night's fire. Oh, that was a surprise. Bleary red eyes blinked once, then widened as sudden realization broke with the dawn. He was still there. If he'd heard her scream in her sleep, he made no mention of it. He didn't even seem to be aware that she stirred at all. Never mind that. He was still here, which meant he existed not as a figment of her imagination, but as a person. Instead of speaking, Salem contented herself to watching the blonde working for a few moments more before she made her wakefulness known to him. She hadn't laid with her last night. She knew that much because she found herself fully clothed, if a bit dirty from sleeping on the grass. She wasn't sure what to make of that. On one hand, the prospect of the chaos of courtship actually excited the silly maiden that lingered in her heart. On the other, well, she had an itch she needed to scratch, damn it, and she was beginning to wonder if this boy wasn't as dense as a brick. No, thicker. Well, she'd just have to be blunt enough to break through to him now, wouldn't she? As she looked on, what remained of last night's dinner was carefully sealed in a strange scroll of some sort. He just sort of pushed the meat into his scroll, and it vanished in a puff of smoke. Salem regarded the object with tingling interest in the early morning sunlight. Mayhap it was magic of some sort. No, that was unlikely. The god of darkness, damn him to the void, had stolen that gift from Remnant, ripping it away from mankind before he destroyed them. He was the She was the only one who still held it due to her immortality. In all likelihood, this likely relic from Naruto's world, and what a fascinating one it was. She would have to ask him how it worked later. At length, Naruto stood, cleaned his hands one final time, and tilted his head. You've been staring for the better part of 5 minutes now. He spoke the words to empty air back to her. Something on your mind? Salem flushed at having been caught. When did you notice that you were staring holes into my back? A cheeky grin peeked over his shoulder before he turned to face her. Ages ago. You're really not subtle. With wrinkling her nose in mild displeasure, the queen of the grim shook her head and sat up. She really wasn't, was she? Ozma was ever the crafty one, always the schemer, ever the planner, the one, the only time she had tried such. Her glorious crusade ended with the theft of magic and the destruction of the human race. Yeah, she wasn't good with plants. There it is again. A finger poked her cheek. You've got that look about you. I have no idea what you mean, she sulked. Fair enough. What should we do now? A small smile plucked at Salem's lips as she considered his inquiry. Once upon a time she was the one to ask Ozma such a question. Back then she had been a prisoner, no longer. Now it was her turn to answer, and for the first time in eons her mind balked at the answer. Ideas, activities, countless notions of new things you couldn't do with one person, but two. Two was another matter. In the end she settled on the familiar answer. A comfortable response hummed between the two of them. Whatever we want. Hmm. He granted her a grin. Well, there's a river near here. Salem arched an eyebrow. Good sir, surely you're not implying what I smell. That's nope. He laughed, a ray of sunshine once more. I'm implying that I need a bath. Haven't had one in weeks. pale cheeks burned bright as she traipsed after him. Truly, it was a strange thing indeed to be courted again. It left her feeling anxious and excited in equal measure. This young man wasn't some mere morsel to be hastily devoured and forgotten. No, he was a full course meal, a succulent feast, the kind that came around once in a lifetime. This was something to savor. They found that river in relative short order, not a raging white ford as Salem suspected, but a babbling brook fed by a waterfall, one nestled beneath a rocky outcropping and framed by a copse of healthy trees, their green leaves only just beginning to redden with the coming of autumn. It was beautiful to behold, nature in its element, untouched by man or civilization alike. The water looked deep enough to bathe in certainly, if not swim. There was no danger to be had here, and even if there were, she knew no wild animal could possibly fell her, much less her companion. Salem still regarded the running water with thinly veiled concern. "It's nice, isn't it?" her companion hummed, sauntering past her. "I found it a few days ago. Leads all the way down to the ocean." By contrast, Naruto felt no such fear. He stooped to the bank and dipped his hands into the crystal clear liquid with ease, cupping a handful of water within his fingers. From there he thrusted his face into the small puddle he'd created and shook his head vigorously to scrub the dirt from his whiskered cheeks. He didn't even notice her concern until he stood up again. Ah, that's the stuff. Blue eyes caught her fear and narrowed moments later. What's wrong? She looked away, poking her fingers together. I cannot swim. A bead of sweat ran down his brow. "Excuse me, I said I cannot swim, blast you!" Salem sheathed silently and stamped her right foot in a rare lapse of control. Well, why shouldn't she? It wasn't as if her adventures with Salem had ever led her near the water. She didn't even know what an ocean looked like. No wonder she felt the need to cultivate the skill. She never knew what drowning felt like, but she certainly had no desire to experience it. She braced herself for the laughter, for a derisive jeer at the very least. It never came. Naruto's hand came down on her shoulder and gave it a little pat. "Don't wade in too deep." Salem grabbed at his wrist, but found his fingers instead. "Where are you going? Downstream?" She made no effort to tear his arm free. On the contrary, he welcomed the unnatural chill brought on by her hand. "You want to wash in private, right? Can't do that while I'm here now, can you?" The tips of her ears burned a bright pink, and his grin proved telling. "Yep." His smile gleamed at her again. "I thought so. Don't worry, I won't go too far." Salem didn't much like the idea of him leaving her line of sight, but her decency's sake she capitulated. "Be safe." She squeezed his hand. Naruto's smile faltered for a moment. "Holler if you need me, yeah?" She tugged his fingers from hers and sauntered away, leaving the exile with her thoughts. There was no point trying to control him. Something told her that any attempt to rein Naruto in would only lead to chaos and disaster. Salem didn't much mind the former, but she'd endured her fair share of the latter in eons past, never again. Moreover, she'd been a prisoner herself, as she could never force her will on someone who cared for her. Oh ho! A nasty little voice whispered in the back of her head. It was herself. "We care for him now, do we? That's just adorable." "No." Salem hissed the word, fist balling at her fist. "No, no, no. We are not going through this again." She'd endured the whole talking to yourself phase long ago. That had been a particularly bleak moment in her life. When one lived in isolation for hundreds of years, one inevitably became a little mad. The doubt, the fear, the insecurity, it had driven her to a dark place, but she'd emerged from that pit. She wasn't able to slide down that slope, go back if she could help it. And all this for a boy who cooked you dinner and held your hand. We've done other things." She grit her teeth as laughter answered her. "Yes, yes, premarital hand-holding and hugging. How crude, how shameless. Such a dirty girl." "Silence!" Red Eyes strayed back to the waterfall. She'd not had a proper wash in at least a century. She'd never felt the need. She had not cared to. Still, Perhaps the distraction was for the best after all. Dark robes fell in a puddle of her bare feet, and she stepped over them. Salem pulled the pins from her hair, then laid those near her slippers as well, thereby freeing her pale tresses to glimmer in the morning light. Loose waves of ashen hair tumbled down her shoulders as she straightened, concealing her shapely rear while she walked to the water's edge. It might be best to consider cutting it any longer and she might trip. Or you could keep it. The voice chimed unhelpedly. Perhaps he likes girls with long hair, who can say. Ozma certainly did. Salem flinched, but dipped a toe into the water and found it warm, almost pleasantly so. Still, she dithered. She wasn't about to jump in like some uncouth banzai. A mighty shout and a splash downriver told Salem that Naruto held no such reservations. Such a boy. Still, his lack of restraint emboldened her. With one arm folded before her bare breasts, for the sake of modesty, the Queen of Cream waded into the shallows. It felt rather nice, all things considered. She couldn't remember the last time she'd let her hair down fully and allowed herself to bask in a simple pleasure such as this. With a final tentative look back to where Naruto had gone, she began to scrub her arms. "Don't you want to remember?" There it was, that voice again, so familiar, like a long-lost friend he hadn't seen in ages, so nostalgic, so known, so unknown. Naruto frowned as he dunked his head under water. There was a pleasing moment of sweet, blissful nothingness before he came up for air again. That brief second of silence allowed him to better center himself, master his thoughts, and shove down the brief moment of panic he always felt when he spoke to him. "Kurama, right?" he called out in the silence as he shook himself like a wet dog. "Is that you?" "No, I'm freaking Mayor Poppins. Of course it's me." An awkward pause followed as his words rang loudly in his head. "Hey, no need to be rude." The blonde purred his lips. "Was there something you needed?" "I No, I'm sorry." He felt the fox sigh within his psyche. "It's not your fault. None of this is your fault. I'm just irritated. You should have remembered everything by now." Naruto wrinkled his nose and gazed back at his reflection in the water's surface. It felt like him, looked like him, but it wasn't him. Or was it? His head and heart felt disconnected. He felt like a stranger wearing another man's skin. This young man moved as he moved and copied his every gesture, but he couldn't quite equate it with himself. No, not yet. The thought galled him more. "I want to recall what happened to me," he admitted after a moment's pause. "I just couldn't. It's like there's a block there." One hand lashed out, splashing against the water to shadow the face staring back at him. Droplets sprayed everywhere. "Things trickle through every now and again, but I cannot make myself remember." It didn't last, and never did. Soon enough the image reformed, and he was left staring at himself once more. "I've already told you all I know." The fox sulked. That was the crux of the matter, wasn't it? When he'd first landed here he'd been terrified by the concept of a voice in his head. Kermit had proven himself real time and again since then. Moreover, the words he spoke felt true, not like some distant story he couldn't remember, as if he'd been there, lived it. If that wasn't the reason enough to trust him, he didn't know what was. If nothing else, Kurama certainly wasn't an enemy. "And I appreciate it," he soothed. "Thanks to you, I remember my name and how to fight." "You're welcome. But it still doesn't feel like me," the blonde barreled on. "Frankly, it's a lot to take in. You said I ate a god. How does someone devour a deity?" With a lot of anger and great determination, Kurama chuffed, but it sounded false even in his ears. "There wasn't any choice at the time, remember?" He must have sensed his confusion or recalled his amnesia, because once again he retold the tale. "Sasuke lost his arm, Kakashi and Sakura were down for the count, and you? You were badly wounded. You latched onto Kaguya when she stabbed you, yet instead of dying, you ripped her chakra away from her." A shudder passed through their mental link. "I've never seen you that angry before." "Kurama, you just drained her dry, body and soul," the old fox continued to mumble to himself, "like drinking a person through a straw." There wasn't anything left of her afterwards. I don't know how you did it. Not even sure I want to know. A strange sensation plucked at Naruto's heart as he splashed water onto his face. It might have been concern. You alright? Not really, but thanks for asking. I'm here, you're here. That's what matters, but you don't know how we got here. It wasn't a question. I do not. His partner, ally, friend, sounded almost sheepish to admit the truth. Everything went black after that. And no, because I know you're about to ask, I don't know what all that power could do to you. I only remember as much as you do on that front. We woke up in this wasteland together, spent weeks wandering until we met Salem. Naruto concluded with a roll of his eyes. I know, my memory isn't that bad. Everything should come back eventually. It has to. What if it doesn't? He whispered. It will. A snarl greeted him. Speaking of right and wrong, that Salem woman you befriended, she isn't normal. She's broken. You'd do well to be wary of her. And there went all the concern. Every drop of empathy froze into stubborn defiance. Oh, he knew Salem was hiding something. But he also knew better than to pry where he wasn't wanted. He'd seen her step out of that fire unharmed. Whatever secrets she held were her own. She could reveal them at her own leisure or keep them locked away forever. He didn't much mind. He had a secret of his own after all. Calling her out while concealing Kurama from her, that would make him even more of a hypocrite. Then she's like me. Naruto set his jaw in a molish line. If she's as broken as you claim, then I'll just have to build her back up again, won't I? Do you care for her? His face turned red as he recalled the events of last night. They had done, they hadn't done anything untoward. They'd sat, held hands, and talked about their lives until they fell asleep. Well, he'd done most of the talking. Salem had just listened until the end. The little that she told him, though, well, if someone were to tell him she was evil at this very moment, he'd stand up and punch him in the mouth. Yeah, the admission surprised him when it came. I do care about her. A man with hardly any memories to his name and a woman left alone to die. They really did make an odd pair. Karma agreed with that assessment. What? The blonde scowled. Why are you laughing at me? A fresh peal of laughter greeted him. Even with your memories gone, you're still you for the most part. That's a relief. Course I'm mean. He sulked, spinning in the water to face the shore once more. Sometimes you get kicked when you're down. Sometimes you kick back, even if that is a big wolf. He trailed off numbly as he came face to face with the massive Grim. It was an absolute monster, even for one of its kind. Standing well over 10 feet tall on all fours, he imagined it would be yet taller still if it stood on its hind legs. Ghastly red eyes regarded him behind a mask of foolish white bone as it lurked at the water's edge, mighty claws digging into the loamy sail while it tried to make sense of him. Naruto couldn't bring himself to move, and so the beast moved for him, nose sniffing as it leaned across the shallow to inspect him. But no slavering wolf was this. It didn't attack as something held it back. Whoa there, girl! Naruto stood slowly and raised his hands, water dripping from his shoulders. Let's not do anything rash, eh? I'm not in the mood for a fight. Scarlet Orb stared back at him intently. I'm just gonna get dressed now, all right? He stepped one hand up as he reached for his breeches. Sit. Stay. The beast made no move to attack him as he donned them. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing. This thing almost seemed intelligent. He'd seen Grim before, even fought a few of the mindless beasts a time or two when he had no other choice. Some he'd slain, others he'd driven away. Some returned, others did not. From what he'd seen thus far, you had to be wary of the clever Grim. The longer these creatures lived, the wiser and larger they became. This one looked like it could snap a grown man in half with a single bite. Not a threat to him by any means, but he'd rather not fight unless he had to. So, we good? He answered a guess, stepping to the right. The beast turned its head to follow him, and he beheld the cracks in its mask. Rather, a series of spider web of fractures etched around what appeared to what passed for his right eye. That looked familiar. He'd seen those somewhere before, hadn't he? In the back of his shattered mind, a recent memory stirred. Clenched knuckles buried into the beast's face, a snapping its gaping maw to a side before those fangs could find him. Its body crashed to the floor with a startled yelp. Lacking the strength to rise, it snarled weakly. Stay! He stabbed a finger at it. You're not strong enough to beat me. Blazing red orbs glowering balefully at him as he walked away. Naruto blinked and reality snapped back. Wait a minute! His fist smacked into an open palm. I know you. You're that damn dog from before. His voice seemed to reactivate the grim, for no sooner did he shout that it bowled forward. Naruto tensed, but no attack came. Instead, it rammed its snout into his chest. He felt its entire body inhale deeply, seeking his scent like some giant dog. When it began to lick him, he laughed and tried to ward it off with his hands. "Whoa, hey!" He sputtered as that rough tongue dragged across the length of his face. "Down, girl, down!" Much to his dismay, the wolf only made a chuffing sound and redoubled its efforts. Large paws pushed him down and knocked him back into the water again. He thrashed upright, coughing and hacking. "Stay!" He stabbed a finger at it incredibly. The beast obeyed. "It probably smells Salem on you. Huh!" The Naruto blinked. "What does she have to do with this? You really have no idea, do you? Well, I'm not opening that can of worms." As if summoned by that very thought, they heard her shriek somewhere a few ways ahead of them. Naruto blew out a long, suffering sigh and lopped in that direction. Much to his chagrin, the wolf followed him.